I stood frozen in disbelief as 12 workers erected a metal fence around the backyard of my home. Elizabeth Blackwell, the HOA president, with her pointed nose and ask for the manager haircut, stood with her hands on her hips, looking at me with a smug smile. Community property, my friend. You should have read the contract more carefully before signing. My blood boiled as I watched them hammer in signs reading, "Private area, HOA members only." But they didn't know one thing. Beneath the old house I had just bought lay a secret that had been hidden for nearly 100 years. And that would be my trump card, to teach her a lesson she would never forget. If you're watching from California, drop a comment saying HOA nightmare below this video to let me know you're here. This AS story about how I defeated a greedy HOA will keep you glued to your screen. My name is James Walker, and 6 months ago, I was living the dream. After 12 years grinding away as a software engineer in San Francisco, I'd finally saved enough to escape the noise and chaos of city life. I found the perfect house, a charming, century-old colonial with gorgeous woodwork, bay windows, and, most importantly, a spacious backyard that bordered a public park in the quiet community of Westbrook Estates. The moment I walked the property, I envisioned transforming that yard into a vegetable garden and meditation space, my own private sanctuary. The real estate agent mentioned something about an HOA but assured me they were hands-off and mostly concerned with maintaining property values. She handed me a thick contract, which I admittedly skimmed through, focusing mainly on the financial obligations. The monthly dues seemed reasonable, and I was too enchanted by the house itself to worry about bureaucratic details. I signed the papers, moved in, and spent the first several months in absolute bliss, renovating the interior and planning my garden project for the spring. Then came that fateful morning in March. I was working from home when the sound of trucks and shouting men drew me to the window. The scene that greeted me seemed surreal. Workers unloading metal fencing materials along the border of my backyard. I rushed outside in sweatpants and a t-shirt, coffee still in hand, demanding to know what was happening. That's when I first met Elizabeth Blackwell. She was perhaps in her early 50s, impeccably dressed in a beige pantsuit that likely cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her blonde hair was styled in a severe bob. "We're establishing the boundary for the community recreational area," she informed me with practiced politeness that did nothing to hide her condescension. "This area has always been designated common property for Westbrook Estates residents." I was stunned. "But this is my land. It came with the house I purchased." Elizabeth's smile didn't reach her eyes as she produced a folder with what she claimed was an official community map. "Actually, Mr. Walker, if you'd read Section 12, Paragraph 4 of your homeowner's agreement, you'd know that this portion extends beyond your property line and has been earmarked for community use since the neighborhood was established." I rushed back inside to retrieve my copy of the contract, flipping frantically through the pages. There was indeed a section about common areas, but it was vaguely worded and made no specific mention of my backyard. When I returned and pointed this out, Elizabeth's demeanor shifted from smugly polite to openly hostile. "The HOA board has unanimously interpreted the language to include this parcel. The fence installation has been properly permitted and approved. If you continue to interfere, I'll have no choice but to report you for disrupting approved community improvements." The workers had paused awkwardly, watching our confrontation. I felt utterly helpless. I knew I was being railroaded, but without legal backing at that moment, I couldn't stop 12 workers from continuing their job. Elizabeth must have sensed my hesitation. "I suggest you take any concerns to the next board meeting, Mr. Walker, though I should warn you the previous owners tried the same thing and found the language quite binding." With that, she turned to the foreman. "Please continue." Mr. Walker was just leaving. Left with no immediate recourse, I watched in mounting anger as they resumed hammering posts into what I was certain was my land. Elizabeth stayed for another hour, overseeing the work like some kind of field general, occasionally glancing in my direction with barely concealed triumph. By evening, a 5-foot metal fence had been erected around the entire back portion of what I had thought was my property, complete with a locked gate and those infuriating private area signs. I felt violated. outraged, and completely powerless. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, thinking of all the things I should have said or done. Around 2 in the morning, I decided to look for the original property documents in hopes of finding something, anything, that might help my case. I headed down to the basement, where I'd stored boxes of paperwork from the purchase. The basement was one of the few areas of the house I hadn't yet renovated. It was dark, musty, with exposed stone foundation walls and ancient wooden support beams. As I shifted boxes looking for my documents, I accidentally knocked over a small bookcase the previous owner had left behind. It had been positioned against what I had assumed was just part of the stone foundation wall. But as the bookcase toppled forward, I noticed something odd, a slight difference in the stonework behind it. Curious, I moved closer with my flashlight and discovered what appeared to be the outline of a door. My heart raced as I ran my fingers along the edges, finding a small, nearly invisible latch mechanism. The rough stone felt cool against my fingertips as I traced what seemed like deliberate seams in the foundation wall. The pattern was so subtle, you'd never notice it unless you were specifically looking for it. Vertical lines that didn't quite match the random arrangement of the surrounding stonework. I pressed my palm against different sections, feeling for any movement, until a small piece of stone shifted inward under pressure. A soft click echoed in the basement silence. I held my breath, half expecting something dramatic to happen. But the wall remained still. Only when I applied lateral pressure did I feel the resistance of hidden hinges. With a firm pull, the heavy stone door creaked open on surprisingly well-maintained hinges, revealing a narrow tunnel extending into darkness. The musty scent of earth and old wood rushed to greet me, carrying with it the unmistakable smell of history, that distinct aroma of places untouched by modern life for decades. What the hell? I whispered to myself, simultaneously frightened and intrigued. The air flowing from the passage was noticeably cooler than the basement, carrying hints of damp soil and aged timber. The tunnel entrance was framed with sturdy oak beams, darkened with age but showing remarkably little rot, considering they had to be nearly a century old. I ran my hand along one beam, feeling the careful craftsmanship. This wasn't some hastily constructed hideaway. It was a passage built with intention and expertise. The tunnel was about 5 feet high, forcing me to duck, and barely 3 feet wide. The walls were reinforced with old timber, and the floor was packed earth with occasional wooden boards placed strategically to provide stable footing. I hesitated only briefly before curiosity overwhelmed caution. Grabbing my flashlight, I ventured into the passage, moving slowly to avoid the cobwebs that hung like ghostly curtains. The beam of light revealed boot prints in the fine dust covering the floor. Not recent, but certainly made long after the tunnel's original construction. Someone had been here. Perhaps the previous owner, keeping the secret, but maintaining the passage. I noticed metal brackets along the walls at regular intervals, some still holding the stubs of what must have once been candles or small oil lamps. The air grew increasingly dense as I moved deeper, with the weight of earth above pressing down, not just physically but psychologically. My flashlight beam caught glimpses of small niches cut into the walls, storage spaces perhaps. Now empty, but once possibly holding bottles of illicit liquor. During the Prohibition years, the craftsmanship visible throughout the tunnel spoke of resources and determination. This wasn't just a crude escape route, it was a carefully engineered transport system, hidden in plain sight beneath an unassuming colonial home. As I carefully made my way forward, I couldn't help but feel like I was walking through a physical timeline, my footsteps following those of bootleggers and smugglers from a century past. The tunnel stretched for what felt like 50 yards, gradually sloping upward before ending at another door, this one made of heavy wood, reinforced with iron bands. I pushed it open cautiously and found myself in a small chamber, with a ladder leading up to what appeared to be a trapdoor in the ceiling. Climbing the ladder, I pushed against the trapdoor, disguised on the outside as a large landscaping rock. When I carefully moved it aside and peeked out, I could hardly believe my eyes. I was in my backyard, or rather what had been my backyard. now on the other side of the newly erected fence. From my hidden vantage point, I could see the entire area that Elizabeth and her crew had cordoned off. And there, bathed in moonlight, was something that made my blood boil even hotter. A large sign staked into the ground reading, "Coming soon, exclusive, HOA members recreation area, private pool, and pavilion." So that was their game. They weren't just stealing my land for a community space. They were planning to build some kind of exclusive facility. I carefully replaced the rock trapdoor and made my way back through the tunnel, my mind racing with questions and possibilities. Why was there a hidden tunnel under my house? How old was it? And most importantly, how could I use this unexpected discovery to my advantage? The next morning, I called in sick to work and headed to the local library. The elderly librarian, Dorothy Thompson, was a walking encyclopedia of local history, and her eyes lit up when I asked about my property. "Oh, the old Mason place. You know, that house has quite a colorful history," she said, leading me to the local history section. It was built in 1922 by Joseph Mason, who was officially a businessman, but was widely rumored to be involved in bootlegging during Prohibition. She pulled out a large book of historical photographs, flipping to a page showing my house nearly a century earlier. The property originally extended all the way to what is now the park boundary. The location was perfect for his, let's call them extracurricular activities, being so close to the river for shipments, but just far enough from town to avoid unwanted attention. During her historical tour, she mentioned something that made me sit up straight. There were rumors that Mason had built hidden tunnels to move his merchandise discreetly. Authorities searched several times but never found anything. I tried to keep my expression neutral as she continued. After Prohibition ended, the property changed hands several times. The original land parcel remained intact until the 1970s, when Westbrook Estates was developed. "But you know what's interesting?" she said, pulling out an old survey map. According to the original property records, the back portion that extends to the park boundary was never officially subdivided. Legally speaking, it should still be part of your property deed. My heart raced as I examined the yellowed map. "Would you happen to have copies of the original property lines and maybe the subdivision plans when Westbrook Estates was built?" Dorothy smiled knowingly. "Give me an hour, young man. I think we might find some very interesting discrepancies." By the time I left the library that afternoon, I had a folder full of photocopied documents clearly showing that my property line extended exactly as I believed, all the way to the park boundary. The land that Elizabeth and her HOA cronies were now fencing off was, without question, legally mine. But I still needed to understand how they were getting away with it. On my way home, I stopped at my neighbor's house. Frank Martinez, a retired attorney who had been friendly since I moved in. Frank invited me in for coffee and listened attentively as I explained my situation. "I'm not surprised," he sighed when I finished. "Elizabeth and her board have pulled similar stunts before. They tried to claim the Johnsons' side yard for a community garden last year, but the Johnsons had better lawyers." Frank examined the documents I brought from the library. "These are compelling, but Elizabeth has connections in the local administration. Her ex-husband was a judge here, and she's got half the city council in her pocket." When I asked why the HOA would want my land specifically, Frank's expression darkened. "Follow the money, James. Elizabeth's house, and those of her 3 closest allies on the board, all back up to the section they're trying to take. A private pool and recreation area would substantially increase their property values." He pointed to my map. "Plus, your lot is the only one with direct park access. By controlling it, they control who gets easy access to the park." Frank suggested I hire a lawyer, but warned the process could be lengthy and expensive. "The courts move slowly, and Elizabeth knows every trick in the book to delay proceedings. Even with a solid case, you could be looking at a year or more of legal battles." As I prepared to leave, Frank offered one last piece of advice, one that would shape everything I did next. "Sometimes people like Elizabeth only understand when they're beaten at their own game. The legal route is important, but don't underestimate the power of exposing their scheme to the community." Most homeowners have no idea what the board is doing in their name. That night, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the old property map spread across the table. That's when it hit me. The tunnel wasn't just a historical curiosity, it was my secret weapon. While Elizabeth believed she had successfully blocked my access to the land, I had a hidden route leading directly into it, and I had documented proof that the land was mine. Rather than rushing into an expensive legal battle where Elizabeth had the home field advantage, I could gather evidence of what they were really up to. The next day, I attended the monthly HOA meeting to get a better sense of what I was facing. The meeting was held in the community center near the neighborhood entrance. About 20 homeowners were present, along with the 5-member HOA board seated at a long table in front. Elizabeth commanded the room like a seasoned politician, speaking with authority and dismissing concerns with practiced ease. When one elderly resident questioned the increased landscaping fees, Elizabeth interrupted mid-sentence. "Mrs. Keller, as I've explained before, quality maintenance requires quality funding. We've been through this. Next item, please." Throughout the meeting, I watched the dynamics carefully. Elizabeth clearly held sway over most of the board, especially William Sullivan, a heavy-set man who owned a local construction company. The only member who seemed uneasy about her autocratic style was Jennifer Hudson, a younger woman who occasionally frowned at Elizabeth's more dismissive comments. When the floor opened for general concerns, I raised my hand and asked, innocently, about the new community project along the park boundary. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed slightly when she recognized me. "The recreation area project was approved last quarter and is proceeding on schedule," she replied smoothly. "We're very excited about this exclusive amenity for our residents." When I pressed for details about funding and the planning process, Elizabeth deftly shifted topics. "We'll be distributing full information packets when the project is further along. Now, regarding the upcoming community garage sale." After the meeting, as people were leaving, a woman approached me quietly. "I'm Sarah Parker, the HOA secretary," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Could we talk somewhere private?" We walked to a nearby coffee shop. As soon as we sat down, her professional demeanor crumbled. "What they're doing with your property isn't right," she whispered, even though no one was nearby. "Elizabeth and William amended the community maps last year, without proper board approval. They've been planning this project for months." Sarah explained she needed her job to pay for her daughter's medical treatments, which was why she hadn't spoken up sooner. "Elizabeth is ruthless with people who cross her. The previous secretary questioned some accounting irregularities and was fired the next week. According to Sarah, the exclusive recreation area would include a pool, pavilion, and direct park access. But despite what was said in the meeting, it wouldn't be open to all residents. Only premium members will have key access, she said, which coincidentally includes Elizabeth, William, and their friends, who all live adjacent to the area. Sarah agreed to help me access internal HOA documents in exchange for my promise to keep her involvement secret. "Just be careful," she warned as we parted. "Elizabeth has eyes everywhere in this community." That evening, Elizabeth called me herself. Her voice oozed false sweetness. "I wanted to personally invite you to the small groundbreaking ceremony for the recreation project," she said. "I think it's important for new residents to participate in community milestones. Perhaps once you see the vision for this wonderful amenity, you'll understand why it's so valuable to Westbrook Estates." I accepted politely, already planning my next move. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied. That night I ventured through the tunnel again, this time with a backpack full of wireless security cameras I had purchased online. Carefully concealing them in trees and bushes around the perimeter of the fenced area, I established a surveillance network that fed directly to my computer. Over the next 2 weeks, I documented everything. By day, I worked remotely and researched HOA laws and local building regulations. By night, I used my secret passage to access the site and gathered evidence of numerous violations. William's construction crew was using substandard materials and ignoring safety protocols. Through my cameras, I captured conversations between William and Elizabeth about cutting corners to maximize profits. I documented workers removing survey stakes and placing them elsewhere, effectively expanding the project boundaries. Sarah provided me with internal emails showing Elizabeth had used HOA funds for personal expenses and falsified board votes on multiple occasions. Most damning of all, William brought in his friend, Gary Peterson, a city building inspector, to overlook key issues. My hidden camera captured their entire conversation, including an explicit discussion of what amounted to a bribe disguised as consulting fees. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about my land. It was a systemic abuse of power, affecting the entire community. Elizabeth had turned the HOA into her personal tool for financial gain and control. As the groundbreaking ceremony approached, Elizabeth grew increasingly frustrated with the slow progress. During one heated argument with the foreman, which I captured on camera, she snapped, "This project needs to be completed before anyone discovers the truth. I've already sold premium memberships to my friends. Just make it happen." I smiled as I reviewed the footage. Elizabeth had just incriminated herself beautifully, admitting, on camera, that she was selling access to a facility not yet built, on land that wasn't hers. But I wasn't ready to reveal my cards. Not yet. I needed more comprehensive evidence, and I needed allies. My chance came unexpectedly at a local charity event where I ran into Elizabeth. Putting on my most contrite face, I approached her. "I've been thinking about what you said, about community benefits," I said, watching her wary expression melt into smug satisfaction. "I'm a software engineer. Maybe I could help, with ideas for automated access systems." She studied me for a moment, likely weighing whether I could be useful. "How thoughtful of you, James. We're actually having an informal planning session this Thursday. Why don't you join us?" The planning session turned out to be a private gathering at Elizabeth's lavish home. William Sullivan and 2 other board members were there. I played the part perfectly, the eager new resident trying to make friends and gain favor. Over the following weeks, I continued this dual strategy, publicly appearing supportive while privately gathering irrefutable evidence. And slowly, piece by piece, I began to turn the tide. Coleman, the project manager, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with William's constant demands to cut corners. Jennifer confided to me that many board decisions were made without proper votes, and Peter admitted he felt pressured to compromise his professional standards. William wanted me to use thinner concrete for the pool deck, he told me one afternoon, looking genuinely troubled. When I told him it wouldn't pass code, he just laughed and said, "That's what friends in the inspection office are for." The turning point came during a private dinner at an upscale restaurant. Elizabeth, loosened by several glasses of wine, began boasting about her so-called community accomplishments. She leaned in close, her words slightly slurred. "You know, James, some people just don't deserve the property they own if they can't be bothered to read the fine print. This isn't the first time we've adjusted the community boundaries." My phone was recording in my pocket as she continued. "William and I have been improving this neighborhood for years. The recreation area is just the beginning. Next year, we're looking at the Sanders property on the east side. They have that lovely hilltop view," she chuckled, swirling her wine. "People like you are smart, knowing when you're beaten and finding ways to join the winning team instead." I smiled non-committally, but inside I was celebrating. Elizabeth had just admitted to a pattern of fraudulent behavior. This wasn't an isolated incident. The final piece fell into place when Elizabeth, now considering me firmly in her camp, invited me to an exclusive board leadership meeting about Phase 2 of the development plan. "I think you'll be impressed with our vision, James," she said with a conspiratorial smile. "Perhaps there might even be a place for you on the committee." I accepted her invitation with a polite nod, but in my mind I was already planning my decisive move. With Sarah's help, I began assembling a comprehensive file of evidence. I formally requested verification of the property boundaries from the city planning office, using the historical documents I had found at the library. As I suspected, they confirmed the land was legally part of my property and had never been properly subdivided. I consulted Frank Martinez about the legal strategy. We prepared the necessary paperwork for both civil action and formal complaints to the appropriate regulatory authorities. I also reached out to Emily Wright, a local investigative journalist known for her hard-hitting pieces on community corruption. She was immediately intrigued. "This is explosive," she said as she reviewed the evidence. "If even half of this is true, it's not just an HOA dispute. It's fraud, misappropriation of funds, and possibly criminal corruption." The plan came together quickly. Sarah agreed to play a crucial role at the next HOA meeting. She would voice concerns about the legality of the recreation project and threaten to involve authorities. Based on Elizabeth's behavior pattern, I predicted they'd react rashly, possibly exposing even more misconduct in the process. Frank helped me draft a formal letter addressed to every household in the neighborhood. It included copies of the historical property map, my legal deed, and a clear summary of Elizabeth and William's unethical actions. I also created a password-protected website where residents could view all the supporting evidence for themselves. The final move would be the meeting Elizabeth had arranged to discuss Phase 2. I planned to offer her a fake deal, I'd agree, to formally cede usage rights to my land in exchange for a board position and a percentage of the profits from the new project. The meeting was set to take place at the construction site, where Elizabeth and William could showcase their grand vision. What she didn't know was that I had arranged for a city building inspector, someone other than Gary Peterson, to conduct a surprise inspection that day, based on an anonymous complaint. I had also invited Emily Wright and a photographer to be nearby, ready to document whatever unfolded. The trap was set. When the day came, I met Elizabeth and William at the site. Elizabeth was in high spirits, convinced she had flipped me into an ally. "James, I'm so glad you've come to appreciate the bigger picture," she said, gesturing at the half-built structures. "Not everyone has the foresight to look beyond their personal interest." William rolled out a large site plan on a portable table. "Phase 2 will include expansion into these adjacent properties," he said, pointing to lots that belonged to other homeowners. "We've already started the community use paperwork." I nodded, staying in character. "And how do you handle resistance from homeowners? Not everyone is as cooperative as I've become." They exchanged smug looks. "Most people don't have the knowledge or means to fight the HOA," Elizabeth said, "and those who might cause problems can usually be persuaded once they understand the personal consequences of opposing progress." As they continued discussing their scheme, I spotted a city vehicle pulling into the site. Elizabeth's face darkened when she recognized it as a building inspector's truck. "What is he doing here?" "Gary didn't schedule anything today," she said sharply. William rushed to intercept the inspector while Elizabeth turned to me with suspicion. "Did you know about this?" Before I could answer, another vehicle arrived. Emily Wright's news van, her photographer riding shotgun. The chaos that followed was almost cinematic. William tried to block the inspector, who calmly produced authorization for a full safety inspection. Elizabeth ran over, her usual composure cracking, demanding to see the complaint that triggered it. Emily approached with her microphone. "Miss Blackwell, we'd like your comment on allegations that the Westbrook Estates HOA has misappropriated funds and falsified property boundaries." Elizabeth's face contorted. "This is a private matter. You have no right to be here," Emily replied calmly. "Actually, according to county records, we're standing on private property belonging to Mr. Walker, who invited us here." At the same time, Sarah was leading an emergency HOA meeting across the neighborhood. With Jennifer's help, she had gathered the residents and was presenting the full scope of Elizabeth and William's misconduct. Frank Martinez stood beside her, explaining the legal implications. The crowd was stunned. Back at the construction site, Elizabeth was losing control. "You think you're so clever," she hissed at me. "I'll sue you for defamation. You'll regret ever moving here." I stayed calm, which only enraged her further. "You have no proof I've done anything wrong." That's when I played my trump card. "Actually, I have extensive documentation of everything, including video recordings of your conversations with William about falsifying boundaries, bribing inspectors, and selling access to facilities built on land you don't even own." Elizabeth paled, then snarled, You're bluffing, and even if you had recordings, you obtained them illegally. You've been trespassing. A smile crept across my face. I don't need to trespass on my own property, Elizabeth. I never crossed your fence line, at least not above ground. I explained the existence of the Prohibition-era tunnel I'd found beneath my house. Her eyes widened. I never stepped foot onto your land. I just emerged from underneath it, onto land that legally belongs to me. Meanwhile, the inspector was calling William over, pointing out multiple code violations and demanding permits William couldn't produce. Emily's photographer captured every moment. The following week was a whirlwind of fallout. Elizabeth and William were both forced to resign from the board after a unanimous vote of no confidence. Emily's story made front-page news. Photos of the inspection and quotes from outraged residents ran beneath the headline. The city launched an official investigation into the permit irregularities and suspected bribery. Williams' construction company came under immediate review, with several municipal contracts suspended. Elizabeth faced multiple lawsuits from homeowners who had paid her for access to amenities that never legally existed. A forensic accountant, hired by the city, uncovered years of embezzlement. She had been siphoning tens of thousands annually through fake vendors and inflated contracts, most linked to shell companies she controlled. Her once polished reputation crumbled overnight. Even her former allies turned their backs. The district attorney filed charges for fraud, embezzlement, and corruption. After a highly publicized 3-week trial, Elizabeth was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 4 years in prison, along with full restitution. William didn't fare much better. His role in bribing Gary Peterson led to 18 months in county jail, 5 years of probation, and a permanent revocation of his contractor's license. His company collapsed. Legal fees and restitution drained his finances. He lost his business, his home, and his reputation. Gary Peterson received 6 months in jail and was permanently barred from municipal work. The probe into his activities uncovered a broader pattern of misconduct in the city inspection department. In the end, what started as a stolen patch of land exposed a corrupt empire and brought it crashing down, resulting in 2 additional firings and a complete overhaul of oversight protocols. The city council members who had enabled Elizabeth's schemes through their connections faced public censure, and 2 failed to win re-election in the following cycle. What had begun as a dispute over property lines had cascaded into a community-wide reckoning with corruption that had festered for years. Most satisfying of all, the fence around my property was removed within days, and surveyors came to officially mark the correct boundaries based on the original deed. The half-built structures for Elizabeth's exclusive club were dismantled, returning the land to its natural state. As news of the scandal spread through neighboring communities, other HOAs began internal audits of their own practices, leading to several additional cases of mismanagement being uncovered. What happened in Westbrook Estates became a cautionary tale for HOA boards throughout the region, and a case study in homeowner advocacy. 3 months after that fateful day, Westbrook Estates had transformed. Jennifer Hudson was elected as interim HOA president with a mandate for transparency and reform. With the help of Lisa Bennett, a city attorney, she drafted new HOA bylaws that ensured accountability, limited board powers, and required open voting on all major decisions. Sarah Parker was appointed as project director for what became a true community initiative, converting the land behind my house into a shared garden that everyone could enjoy. Her new position came with a better salary that helped cover her daughter's medical treatments. The community even organized fundraising events to further assist with her family's healthcare costs. Frank Martinez became the official homeowner rights liaison, ensuring residents' voices would be protected moving forward. I declined an official position on the new board, but served as an informal consultant, particularly on matters of transparency and communication. As for the Prohibition Tunnel, I worked with a local historical society to preserve it as a neighborhood landmark. We carefully renovated it with proper structural supports and lighting, transforming it into a small museum that told the story of the house's colorful past and its unexpected role in exposing a modern-day conspiracy. Local school groups would visit for history lessons, and it became a point of pride for the community. On the day we officially opened the community garden, residents gathered for a celebration. Tables of food lined the pathways between newly planted vegetable beds and flower borders. Children played on the lawn that had so nearly become a members-only pool deck. Jennifer gave a short speech thanking everyone who had helped create this new community asset, ending with special recognition for my role in preserving the land for everyone's benefit. Frank stood beside me, whispering, "What did I tell you? Sometimes you have to beat them at their own game." That evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat alone in the garden watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. I reflected on how what had initially seemed like a disaster, losing my private backyard sanctuary, had ultimately led to something far more meaningful. The land wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to the community, and it brought more joy than I could have imagined as a private space. Perhaps this was the land's true purpose all along, I thought to myself. Not a retreat for one person, but a place that brings people together. The tunnel beneath my house had served its purpose twice, once during Prohibition, to connect people to forbidden pleasures, and now, a century later, to connect a neighborhood and restore justice. I couldn't help but wonder what Joseph Mason, the original owner, would think of how his secret passage had been used to expose corruption, rather than hide it. It had been 1 year since I discovered them fencing off my land. Elizabeth and William had received what many considered relatively light sentences given the scope of their fraud. But the personal consequences had been severe. Elizabeth's carefully cultivated social standing was in ruins, and William's construction company had been dissolved entirely. During Elizabeth's sentencing hearing, I had the opportunity to deliver a victim impact statement. Looking directly at her, I spoke not about vengeance, but about community betrayal. The most damaging thing wasn't the attempt to steal my land, I told the court. It was the systematic abuse of trust that eroded the very foundation of our neighborhood. Elizabeth, for her part, sat stone-faced throughout, refusing to show any remorse even as the judge condemned her actions as an egregious exploitation of position and power. The local newspaper published a follow-up piece a month after her sentencing, reporting that she refused all interview requests and was appealing her conviction, a final act of denial that surprised no one who knew her. William, in contrast, seemed genuinely broken by the experience. I encountered him by chance at a coffee shop in a neighboring town 6 months after his release, nearly unrecognizable with a gaunt face and shabby clothes. He approached me hesitantly, eyes downcast. "I know it doesn't mean much now," he said quietly, "but I'm sorry. Elizabeth had a way of making you believe that cutting corners was just being efficient, that bending rules was just being practical. I lost everything listening to her." I didn't offer forgiveness, but I did acknowledge his apology. "Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones we need most," I replied. As he walked away, shoulders slumped, I felt not satisfaction, but a solemn recognition that justice, while necessary, rarely brings joy to anyone involved. Meanwhile, our HOA had become a model of democratic and transparent management that neighboring communities were beginning to emulate. The community garden was thriving, producing enough vegetables to donate to the local food bank every week. Several elderly residents who had previously lived in isolation now spent their days tending the plots and socializing with neighbors. The garden had become more than just a place to grow plants. It was a living symbol of what a community could be when people worked together, rather than being ruled by self-interest and secrecy. The story might have ended there, if not for a chance encounter with a journalist from a national magazine. She was working on a feature about HOA abuses across America, and had stumbled upon Emily's articles. When she interviewed me, I shared not just what had happened, but the valuable lessons I'd learned about property rights, community involvement, and standing up to institutional bullying. The resulting article struck a chord with readers nationwide, many of whom had experienced similar situations. Soon, I was receiving emails from homeowners across the country seeking advice on dealing with their own HOA problems. What started as responding to a few messages evolved into creating an online resource, with templates for document requests, guidelines for researching property boundaries, and strategies for building community support. The Prohibition Tunnel remained a fascinating attraction, now a small tourist destination within our neighborhood. We installed informational plaques that told both the historical story and the modern-day drama of how it helped uncover a conspiracy. What I never expected was that when the national magazine published their story about our community, it would quickly go viral online. The video I posted about the entire incident reached over 5 million views within a week. I received thousands of messages from people across America sharing similar experiences with their HOAs. Last week I got an email from a man named Mark in Florida. He had used similar tactics to fight back against an HOA trying to seize his waterfront access. He didn't have a tunnel, but he used what he learned from my story to gather evidence and unite his neighbors. I was even invited to speak at a national conference on homeowner rights where I met dozens of people fighting similar battles. What started as a personal fight for my property had evolved into something much more significant, a movement empowering homeowners everywhere to stand up for their rights and build better communities. The tunnel beneath my house had become more than just a physical passage. It represented the underground current of resistance against those who would abuse their power. As I prepared for my next speaking engagement, I thought about how unexpected connections, both physical and social, can change everything. A hidden door in a basement wall had led not just to a tunnel, but to a path of justice that had rippled far beyond my little corner of Westbrook Estates. Whenever someone asks how I managed to stand up against a powerful HOA, I simply tell them, sometimes the key to victory isn't strength or money, but the patience to find your own path, even if it means tunneling through darkness. And if you're watching and having trouble with your HOA, remember, read your contracts carefully, understand your rights, and never stop digging, both literally and figuratively. You never know what you might find. The most powerful tool against injustice isn't always a lawsuit or a confrontation. Sometimes it's simply shining a light on what's been hidden in the darkness. As I stood by the beautifully decorated entrance to the tunnel, now marked with a small sign reading, "Secret Passage to Freedom, 1923, I couldn't help but smile. I held my phone, live streaming to my thousands of subscribers, sharing the latest community garden harvest and answering questions from homeowners facing similar battles across the country. What began as a personal fight for my property had evolved into something far greater, a movement empowering homeowners everywhere to stand up for their rights and build better communities. And it all started with an old tunnel and the determination to not let injustice prevail.